So this session is really to look at hybrid scenarios, cross-boundary scenarios, and I'm going to focus at the end more on, well, through most of the content, really on search. And there's a reason for that, and it's because it's the one, I guess, the one true hybrid scenario that we've got working really, really well with good workloads and good capability. The other workloads I'm going to talk about, they work fine, but there's some limitations, and they're kind of restricted in what you can do. So I will touch on them, but I'm going to spend more time talking about search. But just to look, those of you that weren't in my last session, if you don't know me, I work for the Microsoft Product Group in the Office 365 CAT team, which is Customer Advisory Team, or Customer Experience Program Team is what we're kind of being referred to as these days. And our primary responsibility is to make sure that you have a good experience with our products. So when things are going wrong, not just from a, hey, I raise a ticket and something's broken, please fix it, but if we get hundreds of tickets for the same thing, or if we get our on-premises customers who are having some serious issues with core product functionality, they tend to go past the break fix point and they reach our team because it's something systemically or endemically wrong inside the product and needs fixing. And we help to drive that fix. We go and bang on developers' doors, we bang on the feature product managers' doors and say, hey, people don't like this. It doesn't work the way people expect it to do, and it certainly, it's broken. We want you to fix it, and we try and help them fix it by capturing use cases from customers, by building scenarios where we would prefer the product to work in this way, and this is why, and this is potentially how much more business we'd get if we change it. Okay, and we'd make people happier, which is the kind of the core aim. In terms of my history, I've been with Microsoft for my 9th year now. Formerly as a PFE, then I was an escalation engineer in Office 365, so I was feeling the pain when we launched Office 365, and it was, hey, look at our fantastic new product, and we had more support tickets in 1 month than we had for any other product ever. I was one of the guys that was feeling that pain. So I've moved on, but that was kind of where I was for 3 years. Having formerly been a PFE, which if you've come across Microsoft PFEs before, they are the team who get parachuted in when everything goes wrong. So they're your rapid response engineers, they're your, hey, my on-premises farm isn't working and I can't fix it, and I've got database corruption and my web front ends won't start. These are the guys that get called out and they come and help you fix it, or hopefully help you fix it. So I did that for 5 years as well. Formerly, prior to that, going back to SharePoint, I was a SharePoint specialist for Computer Science Corporation. Again, I was there for about 5 years there. And prior to that, I was a process chemist creating drugs, poisons, and explosives. So anybody upsets me, just watch what's under your seat. You've moved rooms now, though, so the secret's gone. Okay, there you go. That's me. I'm a certified master. I've gone through the program 3 times for my own masochistic pleasure. For SharePoint Server 2007, SharePoint 2010, and SharePoint Server 2013. I was an instructor for Enterprise Search, Business Continuity Management, and SQL Server Optimization for SharePoint on that course as well. I love whiskey, so if you want questions answering after the session, there's your bribe. Other than that, I come from Manchester in the UK, so we're having a bad time with one of our football team, my football team right now, but anyway, that's another thing entirely. So what I want to do with this session really is these kind of the takeaways, and I put this slide in this session and not in my previous one, really because hybrid is such a massive thing. I wanted to just let you know where we're going to focus. So configure hybrid search. I'm actually going to walk through that process. I can't demo it here because I don't have the right access to the right places. I've got a kind of hybrid solution built, which I'll talk to you about and show you, but it's not a true Office 365 hybrid, but it'll give you the impression of what you do when you need to configure it. We're going to talk about the configurations, what's needed for what we call inbound and outbound hybrid scenarios. So whether you're bringing 365 data into your on-premises environment or the other way around, or both perhaps. We're going to talk about both of those. And the key takeaways is really about how you configure it, how you build it, and what capabilities you need and skill sets you'll need. It isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. And many of our customers don't have the infrastructure to be able to do it in the first place. So there's some investments that might be needed there. So I want to cover off those. And I'm going to do that by going through a little bit about the hybrid scenarios, so the search, BCM, talk a little bit about SAP and Duet, if any of you come across that scenario. Then configuration and deployment, scenarios around identity management, which is a crucial issue for hybrid. You cannot have a hybrid solution without a very good, very integrated identity management platform. And then configure hybrid search and query rules. And I'm going to try and show you a demo around about this point, which will cover off what the query rules look like, how you connect to a SharePoint remote index, that kind of thing. So just going back to the beginning, going back to kind of why and what, and sorry, these are kind of more marketing slides, but the cloud is the future, is the strap line, if you like. We want all of our customers to be in the cloud within a certain time period. Is it going to happen? Anyone in the room thinks everyone will be in the cloud? No. Good, because neither do we. Not really. In 3 years' time, we would be very happy if 60% of our customer base was in the cloud. That would be an enormous capture. And when we think about the ones that can't move, for government compliance reasons, for data protection reasons, for regional boundary regions, there's a number of reasons why people can't move. And that's fine. They tend to be the more edge cases. They tend to be the ones that will get dealt with eventually when we introduce things like, if you came to my previous session, I talked about something called a Project Gallatin in China, where we're building in-country based Office 365 deployment. So the concept of the Office 365 data center in a container, shipped into the car park in your office, or shipped into the middle of an industrial park where multiple customers can use it inside a country. That's a realistic possibility. That sounds a bit of an oxymoron, but we're trying to get to that point, and we are working very hard. We've done that kind of thing in China. We've got a data center in China run by Chinese nationals, operated by Chinese contractors who entirely run Office 365 code inside that data center for Chinese customers. No access from the US, no access from the rest of the world, meets all the Chinese regulations. If we can do it in China, we can do it anywhere, to be honest.
Chinese cloud.
Say again?
Chinese cloud.
Cloud. Exactly, yeah. So thinking about the future of the cloud and where we're going to go to, what do you get? So freeing up on-premise resources and elastic expansion are kind of the things that people think about. If you think about elastic expansion in SharePoint, if any of you have deployed SharePoint on premises, elastic expansion is a bit difficult. And it's difficult in the cloud too. We are working hard on the SharePoint code base such that we can have elastic expansion in the cloud. So we can say things like, hey, you know what? Europe's waking up. Let's deploy another 10,000 SharePoint servers in the Amsterdam data center just for the next 2 hours. Then we'll just shut them all down again to cope with the load. We want to be able to do that. The Azure IIS type experience, or PaaS type experience, where we know, hey, we're going to do a load more compute. We need a lot more compute power for the next 2 hours. Let's scale these things out and then draw them all back in again. So making the data center and the farms more efficient, that's where we want to get to with 365. SharePoint doesn't lend itself to that very well. So we have to change SharePoint such that it does. High availability. If you're in my last session, the HA scenarios that we have for SharePoint Online are enormous. I asked the question about how many copies of data do we have of your data in our various environments, and it's over 10. At any one point in time, there's 10 copies of your data in our environments, whether it's on a mirrored set of disks, whether it's on a replicated database, whether it's on a file share backup, in all different places. If you lose any one point, any place, if we lose your data, we can get it back from all these different areas. And the last step would be a database restore. So we protect your data significantly. We protect the infrastructure significantly. We have the concept of what we call zero downtime. So we want to make sure we drive everything to the point in time that your data is always available and is never lost. And that's a benefit you get with the cloud. That's a very, very difficult thing to do on premises. Zero downtime, zero recovery point objective, zero recovery time objective. Almost impossible. Infinite money is what buys you that type of capability. So we'll invest the money, over $4 billion invested so far in just in hardware and infrastructure alone. That's something that most companies can't afford to do. 99+% can't afford to do. It does give us some challenges though. So anyone run full trust code on premises with SharePoint? No? Or don't know? Maybe you don't know. A few, obviously some do. You can't run full trust code in the cloud. That's kind of a given and known scenario. So you have to adopt this apps model approach for a different way of deploying customized solutions and a different way of approaching the needs of your business. Other things like existing integration, so back-end systems, back-end data sources that you might need to surface in the cloud. We're getting better. We're hoping that some of these hybrid things I'm going to talk about will get you there. but we're not there yet. There's limitations and custom requirements. And migration. Migration to the cloud is painful. Okay, there's no two ways to say that. It is painful. You need third-party tooling to migrate your on-premises SharePoint into a cloud scenario, into Office 365. We want to get better at this. Anyone going to SharePoint conference this year? Okay. I'm going. We're trying to drive migration capabilities such that instead of having to go to a third party, and I will name them, there's some great tools out there. Metalogix produce some wide-ranging, various capable tools to do effectively drag and drop from your on-premises SharePoint into the Office 365 deployment and back again, or to another service provider. You can do to Amazon, you can do to anyone that provides hosted SharePoint solutions, you can use these tools for. We want to do our own. We want to try and provide migration tooling that's more efficient, that's easier, that's streamlined specifically for Office 365. So you can do migration faster and with better fidelity. So we're trying to get there. We know it's hard, we know it's a challenge. And then other things like workflows. Moving workflows is painful. People build these comprehensive business workflows in their on-premises SharePoint, and trying to move that and replicate that in the cloud becomes difficult. You sometimes have to redevelop it, change, start creating sandbox solutions with custom workflow actions, or thinking about the way workflows changed in the 2013 or Wave 15 timeframe with the concept of Azure Workflow Manager or Workflow Manager product, changing the way you build your custom workflows in order to replicate what you do in your own businesses today into the cloud. And it's a challenge, it's painful. We can help and will help where we can. In most cases, getting us to do this for you means more money though. It's an MCS engagement or it's something else like those lines. So we're trying to produce tooling and guidance and capability for you to do it for yourselves. And then along the way, the actual moving to the cloud type piece. I should have built that graphic earlier. Let me build this out. Sorry, go back one. Moving to the cloud, these are the challenges that we have if we don't get it right. So the things that stop you moving to the cloud, the things that give you limitations, and when I say cloud, yeah, I mean Office 365, but it could be any hosted provider. The scenarios that break, the scenarios that don't work, these are the challenges that stop us from hitting that 100% and stop us from hitting that 60% of all our customers up there. So very long wait time. How long does it take to get that feature change, to get that capability in the cloud that you're looking for, that interweaved search experience, exposing your online SQL reporting services into the cloud? How long is that going to take to get it done? How difficult is it today? Guest sharing options, so sharing capabilities, interacting cross tenancies. You're all 365 customers, if you have tenancies today, a lot of you will. I don't know if you have more than one tenancy. So a question that asked in my previous session was, I'd like to take data from this tenant and put it in that tenant. How can I do that? Can you do that for me? And the answer is no. If you want to do that, you have to do custom tooling or buy a third-party tool to drag and drop that data around. So limited sharing capabilities. We'd love to be able to do, well, if I'm a company and I have 10 tenancies, why can't I have a super tenant that says, okay, I want to share data from this tenant and that tenant. I want them to be able to share things. Today, you'd have to give them rights and start playing with permissions and things. I want to be able to do that seamless. And that's another thing hopefully a challenge we're trying to address. So to allow you to interact with your partners in a more seamless way rather than having to have multiple accounts or do anonymous sharing and that kind of thing. And then storage demands is a killer, right? 10 copies of your data, 37,000 SQL Server databases. That was the number a year ago in Office 365. That's a significant amount of disk space. Capacity is hard. We're already buying double-digit percentage numbers of hardware from Dell and HP to accommodate this. We're building new data centers. I was in the Amsterdam data center about 2 years ago when one of the Exchange deployments turned up for Office 365, and it was 11,000 physical machines in about 6 trucks. It was just a ridiculous amount of hardware. And that's like Dell's output for a month or something just turned up at the Microsoft data center. But you get the idea. Storage demands are difficult. Having the right disks, the right capability, and the right speed of those disks is a challenge. So hybrid then. Anyone in the room tried playing around with hybrid, considered hybrid, or knows what hybrid actually is? 1, 2. Say again? so hybrid in terms of, I'm thinking more about, I want to move to the cloud. My business direction says it's more efficient for us, we'll save money. I can't go there yet. I have business challenges. I still need an on-premises capability, whether that's SharePoint or Exchange. I'm more focused on SharePoint. So how can I have a cloud base and an on-premises base and have something in the middle that kind of allows me to do both with the same identities, so I've not got two sets of logins, so I can do cross-boundary searching, I can expose business data in the cloud, that kind of hybrid type approach. So the thing that enables you to think about moving all of your business functions to the cloud is this kind of first step with hybrid functionality. And it gives us a whole ton of things. So SkyDrive Pro and Yammer. Yammer is obviously not as well integrated with SharePoint today as we'd quite like. That might be an understatement for those of you that have tried it. But certainly it is the direction we're trying to go with the social experience and the way Yammer does things. They have a really tight-knit product, and we want to get that functionality seamlessly integrated with SharePoint. So it's not just a couple of web parts you drop on a page. Actually, under the hood, we're basically driving the Yammer engine inside the SharePoint platform. And then consider things like, what about Duet? So if you run SAP, we have Duet capabilities where you can expose Duet data in Office 365 using on-premises connectors. Business connectivity services. So if you have SQL Server reporting services, for example, that exposes OData endpoints, I can use BCS services in the cloud and create app models and business continuity management, business connectivity management models that can connect to that OData endpoint and expose that data as SharePoint lists or for consumption inside Office 365. So again, I'm being able to shut down my on-premises SharePoint and move it into the cloud. But I might not be able to do it for everything. So hybrid is kind of trying to get, I won't say the best of both worlds, but an integration of both, where you have both sets of scenarios. There's some upsides. So it's always available. If you're in Office 365, it's available from your laptop, from your desktop, from your phone, including iPhone, including Android. We have all apps and capabilities for that now. We have dedicated developer streams for Android and iPhones inside the Microsoft product groups. Easy connectivity, so customers and partners, again, yes, it's easy to connect. You can give them access to your stuff. You can do the sharing capability to provide that. The cross-tenant thing is a bit more of a challenge. And then continuous improvement and the concept of elastic expansions and the benefits. So basically, that last 3 bullet points is really saying all the problems you would have with having your own infrastructure on premises and making it available for people outside your business by exposing the data through reverse proxies or whatever it might be, we'll take care of all that. You can forget doing all that kind of stuff. We'll deal with that. And if it breaks, you know what? We'll give you your money back as well. So you can put a claim in that says, we're down for 3 days. We want our money back for 3 days subscription. So we're not only taking on the burden of running it for you, we're also giving you key promises that we'll do it in a good way. So one of the things, or one of the key things in that whole spectrum of hybrid is the concept of search and single sign-on. So single sign-on means different things to different people. In the hybrid world, single sign-on really means same sign-on. So it's not necessarily completely seamless. You might get prompted for your ID a few times depending on where you bounce around, but it's the same ID, right? It's same sign-on as opposed to single. In most cases it works single sign-on. So what about the journey? How do we get there? And this comes into this, how do I move my 30% to my 60% to my 100% for on-premises to cloud migration? And if we think about what the cloud actually is, it's a number of different things. When we think about traditional deployments in our on-premises world, sorry, this has hurt my ear. Then we think about private cloud. So private cloud would be if you were having a dedicated hosting. So if you've any of you come across the concept of Office 365 dedicated, which is another service we have, it's kind of the premium offering of Office 365, where the customer actually has their own entire farm. They even have their own AD domain and their own exchange. They have their own dedicated hardware. It costs a lot more money, but that would be the concept of like a private cloud scenario. And then public cloud is where you're sharing infrastructure. So the multi-tenancy infrastructure, our farms are designed to support up to 100,000 tenants on one farm. That's a lot of people, it's a lot of data, it's a lot of sites. Hundreds of servers potentially per farm. And that's the concept of the public cloud. So the migration is, the idea is $signs. Working down here on your own infrastructure costs money. Not only costs you simple things, you think about how much it costs me to actually power up these devices, how much it costs me for people to manage them, how much it costs me to maintain and patch and get the next version of the software and pay for licenses, versus my public cloud. If I'm an Exchange user, I don't know what the license price is specifically in Sweden. If I was an Exchange user and I just wanted a mailbox in Microsoft Public Cloud, it would cost me €2, euros, 25 krona a month. Okay, that's pretty good. I've got the exchange rate right. So 25 krona a month, and I get myself an Exchange mailbox with 50 gig capacity these days, I think it is. So compared to running an Exchange server and a desktop client and everything else down here, the cost savings are just, they just scale into, they fade into insignificance. So the public cloud is where we get maximum benefit from a cost perspective. And this is kind of cost is without doubt one of the key drivers in this, given the state of the various economies around the world these days. But if I'm an enterprise customer, I have to think about what's going on out there. So Office 365 is attractive, it does save me money, and I always have the latest and greatest tools. I have the latest and greatest capabilities. If I have an Office 365 subscription, I can have the latest and greatest Office client, and my computer keeps popping up telling me I need to install a new one. So that's a really good advantage. The fact that I get these latest versions, I can install them, click to run. They install seamlessly, more or less. I can even install them in the background while I'm still working on some of them as well. So it's a really well invested capability. And focus on your core business. So if you're not into IT, if you're not an IT business, why would you invest significantly in IT infrastructure and IT people? Okay, traditionally, you had no choice. Even some of the smallest companies, I have my next door neighbour runs his own building company. He has about 15 employees, and he actually has a part-time IT administrator. Okay, he doesn't need a full-time one, but he has to pay that guy a retainer every month. I just told him, why don't you move to Office 365? And now the guy gets half his retainer fee just to keep the desktops working. He doesn't have an Exchange server anymore. He saved his licenses there. So I've done my other friend out of some money, but I've helped another one, right? So it's kind of a trade-off. So it saves money, and it means they don't have to focus on the IT. And he's also not now thinking, well, my Exchange servers, 2010 and 2013's out, do I need to upgrade it? And am I going to have business interruption while that happens? Email today, most businesses can't function without email. And that's just one example. SharePoint's a little more different, but that's kind of the thing. So, and the final thing is, Microsoft can run SharePoint more reliably and efficiently than I can. That depends who you're talking to. But we're pretty good at it. Is Victor in the room? No. And then the key thing is scale up and scale down. Now, we are improving scale up and scale down, as I mentioned already. The ability to scale up and scale down services such that we can have true elastic services and meet the volume and meet the demand for when it's needed, and then scale back down means our business efficiency gets better as well as yours does. So if I have to run 1,000 servers in the morning, but I only have to run 250 for the rest of the day, then we save money as well. Because at the moment, Office 365 is built for massive scale. The number of servers is astronomical. Okay, the power efficiency is very quite poor. We're getting better all the time. The data center overall efficiency is really good, but we're running like 100 servers to support. If it was an on-premises deployment, we'd probably run about 15. But we can't afford to have outages. We can't afford to have downtime. We can't afford to have failures. So we've built this massive high availability into all our structures. And what we're doing as we're learning over time is we're basically saying, okay, well, this farm actually is running about 60% efficient. So that means 40% of those compute power is not really being used. Let's switch off 20% of it and see what happens. And then monitor it for a bit longer. And then maybe, we can take a bit more out. And then once we get to the point where we can handle the peaks, we can then have this built-in capacity to say, at 8 o'clock in the morning in Europe, I need another 50 machines in that farm. Spin them up and then shut them down when the compute's done. So that's kind of where we want to get, a really agile type approach. And then, obviously from a business perspective, I can more easily work with my customers. So I want my customers and my own people focused on my business and making money for me, not spending money for me. Okay. At the moment, from an enterprise perspective, my business runs on premises. So I have existing investments. And these are the things we kind of want to either say, well, you don't need them anymore because we can do that workload in the cloud. Or yes, you do need them, but you don't need all that presentation layer around your SQL Server reporting engine. You just need the reporting engine, and we can present everything in Office 365, and that's where the hybrid approach comes in. And then this is kind of just saying the same things we've already said. That's kind of the interesting one. We mentioned data, sensitive data already, and the concept of the data center in a box and that kind of thing, and we are getting much better at that. We are looking at expanding markets and improving the security of data inside individual country boundaries, but that's a whole new topic. So what if I want to move? When do I move, and how do I move it? It becomes more of a challenge. So we have these concepts, or these three kind of concepts we call them. The concept of the early adopter, the risk averse, and then the typical. So the early adopter is the guy that says, give me everything now. I want it now. Give me a tenant. I want to do this, test it, play with it, move all my business to it. We'll work out what the problems are, and we'll deal with the problems as they arise. So they move everything to the cloud as quickly as possible. They're the ones that will save all the money up front. They're the ones that will feel more of the pain because they're maybe not truly thinking about potential pitfalls and scenarios. Then there's the risk averse, which is the completely opposite, where people will sign up for a SharePoint Online trial. There's about, I think it was 400,000 trial tenants on our system right now. Some are old, some are new, some are expiring, some are not. If you ever created a trial tenant and get nagged to death by the email that follows it saying, it's expiring, what do you want us to do with the data? Hey, if you don't log on here now, we're going to kill it. And then next week we'll tell you the same thing, and the week after we'll tell you the same thing. And then about 120 days later, we'll finally say, it's gone. Okay, the nag email is obviously to get you to come back. So that's where the risk averse sits. They create these trial tenants, they evaluate, they determine the return on investment. They might create a trial tenant and move part of their workforce to it. They might shut down one SharePoint farm or one web application and move all of that data into the cloud, see how it goes, see what the user experience is. Perhaps go with the MySite experience in the cloud, perhaps not. They'll move different workloads. And then the typical one that we're seeing more and more often is people will say, right, that SharePoint farm on premises, marking the whole thing read-only. You can't create anything new in that farm. If you want to create anything new, you go and use our new shiny thing in Office 365 or in whatever hosting provider it is. So it's kind of the business forcing their users to go down that route. And that's another way to approach it. But this is very typical. And this is how we did it at Microsoft. So our MSIT farm and our eDog farm, which is our evaluation platform for Office 365, we basically, all of the sites on that environment, we migrated a lot of them, the business required ones, and a lot of them just got locked out. Right, it's read only, stop putting stuff in there. We won't delete it, you can still search it, you can't change it. You want to change it, you take a copy of the file, you build a new site collection out in our own, Microsoft have our own farm in Office 365, and we put our own data there, and it's a case of, okay, you want to keep working on that document, go and put it over there and carry on working on it. So we force people to go down that route. So it's it's almost like a hybrid migration approach. And from a life cycle perspective, this is kind of how it works in terms of early, mid, and late, and the percentage of kind of people moving or how much data would move. It's just kind of to give you a rough snapshot. And there's obviously people that fall in the gaps. There's people that will do early adoption for some stuff, but consider themselves late adopters for other. It depends on the business criticality. So I guess the key thing is how hybrid can actually help you. So search is one of the key things. So being able to find your content. We drive, if you're familiar with SharePoint, and certainly SharePoint 2013, we put a big stake and a huge investment in the concepts of what we call the enterprise search experience or search-driven experiences, driving your user portal by using search content to expose information there. So if any of you have been to websites like Dell.com or BestBuy.com, they don't store content in their environments. That entire experience is driven from the search index. All of that data that appears on the page is coming directly out of the search index. And we're pushing down people down that route with SharePoint all the time. So the concept of the hybrid thing means that I can have search experiences that pull data out of the cloud, pull data from on-premises, and build a collaborative environment or a publishing data management, data exposure environment, all from the search indexes. And we can do that with hybrid and with on-premises. BCS is one of the other capabilities. BCS is a little bit limited. Yes, we can expose through business connectivity services. I can pull data out of my SQL servers on premises. I can present them to the cloud. I can pull list data out of SharePoint in the cloud and expose it on premises. So it's kind of a two-way thing. But it's very limited to scenarios where you must be using the OData, making OData connections, to expose that. We can't do generic, I'm going to just create a connection to my SQL server just because I know its name and I've got it sat facing the internet. That isn't going to work. You must use web service connections and OData connectivity. So yes, you can do it. We do provide, there is some limitations though. When we think about hybrid and search and how this whole thing works, this will come probably more evident as I walk through the process of actually configuring the thing. This is what I mentioned about OData sources. So we're very limited in what you can do with hybrid BCS, but it is there. We do have that functionality. So if any of you need to come across that. I think I've got double slides here somewhere. So just let me build this out. This is kind of the stuff I've already said. So I'm going to go into search very much in a few minutes, but thinking about search, thinking about BCS and Duet. So SAP, Microsoft, we have our own SAP instance. We have our own Duet hybrid capabilities so that people can, we don't expose our SAP to the internet, but we do have Office 365 tenants in our own Microsoft cloud that are on the internet and using SAP connectors, the Duet connectors, to bring the SAP data out so people can access it from anywhere in the world they want to be. From a BCS perspective, again, it's the same thing as traditional on-premises BCS, but we're limited in the connectivity. You can't expose that SQL server. It has to be to the OData endpoints. And search is the interesting one in terms of what you can do, and more probably specifically what you can't. So one thing you can't do with search, as you'll see in a few minutes, is you can't have a single set of results, for example. Because when you're bringing results from two different indexes, how do you know that the result number one over here is higher or lower in relevance to my search term than result number one over there? So you can't just say, okay, well, I can calculate the ranking and merge them together and create one set. You can do it with custom code. You can do it if you go to BA Insight and buy their search web parts, and they'll do it for you. They'll interleave the results, so it's one homogeneous result set. But they do it based on a weighting algorithm that you have to tell them. Which site's more authoritative than the other, which type of documents do you want to be more authoritative than others, and they'll do it for you. But what I'm going to show you is the traditional way that we do it inside or with out-the-box configuration for Office 365 and SharePoint on premises. And this is stuff I think I've already covered. So from hybrid search, there's three things. There's really two scenarios, but when you do both of them, you end up with a third. So there's the concept of what we call outbound search, and that's our most common. So that's where I'm an on-premises SharePoint user, and within my search center on my on-premises farm, I'm reaching out and pulling result sources, or pulling results from the Office 365 index as well. So I've got half my estate migrated to the cloud, and when I search here, I want to make sure I'm also searching out there. So that's the outbound scenario. The inbound scenario is the opposite. So I'm in Office 365 and I'm doing a search. I want to make sure I'm also interrogating my on-premises search indexes and pulling my results back there as well. So again, I can find both things in both places. And then the final one is the concept of this, the two-way, and that's where I do both. So if I do inbound and outbound, I end up with two-way. So it works in either direction. And this is, we have this configuration inside Microsoft today. If any of you are Microsoft employees and go to MSW, you'll get this experience. Guidance is obviously to start small. Use outbound. Outbound is much less complicated to set up. So I'm going to talk through, sorry, I've just been reminded I've got an Office client to install again. So deployment phases. When we're thinking about deploying hybrid, I'll build this out. There's three key things to think about. Infrastructure, identity, and workload. Infrastructure is really the easy bit. What do I need? What physical components do I need? What software do I need in order to make this happen? Identity gets slightly more challenging. If I want to do a hybrid connection to something else, I don't want pop-ups all the time saying, oh, log in, log in, log in. I don't want that experience. I want it to be seamless. So from an identity perspective, I need to make sure that the identity I use on premises, when I'm logging into my desktop, connect to SharePoint, and then go and search against SharePoint local and in the cloud, is completely seamless. So the cloud needs to know who I am logged onto my desktop. And there's things I need to do to make that happen. And vice versa, if I'm going the other way. So it needs to be a single identity. And then workload deployment and customization is really about how do I want my search results to look when they actually appear. Do I want them to be a floating result block? Do I want them to be a separate page of results? It's really about how you configure that, and I'll show you that in a demo. And then the whole thing put together gives you hybrid. So we're kind of building various building blocks that give us a hybrid capability. The first thing we need to do with that is think about the components and the infrastructure. So I'm going to walk through each of these and what we actually need to make this happen and show you this. I can't demo this actual bit, unfortunately, because I don't have the access I need here, but and there's something wrong with my demo tenant. But the various tools, I'm going to talk you through each of these steps to actually show you how you actually make this work. And it is relatively straightforward. So, he says with a complicated diagram. In terms of infrastructure deployment, there's some stuff on here you need to know about. Well, you need to know about all of it, but there's a lot of stuff on here you don't need to care about, more importantly. And that's everything over here you don't need to care about. This stuff, I'm going to walk through the various pieces here. So the concept of using Active Directory Federation services for single sign-on, the concept of using directory synchronization, and the latest version of the directory synchronization tool, which includes password hash replication. So we can actually store a hash of your password up here in the AD, or what used to be called the MSODS, is now the Azure Active Directory Services. And it is a hash, we don't replicate the real thing. The ability to do that, and then the ability to expose our search results over here on our SharePoint farm, or over in here on our Office 365 tenant. And when we join all the dots up, this is where the data flow works. So yes, it looks complicated. There's a diagram online, if you look at this in the TechNet articles, that looks even more complicated than that one. And basically what we're doing here is, and I will walk through this like I say, is ADFS gives us single sign-on. So it means when I go over here, my identity platform out here redirects me to IDFS servers, authenticates me against my on-premises Active Directory, and signs me into Office 365. A couple of redirects happen, and it's all very seamless. Relatively seamless. Down here, I'm going to talk about what this is required for. So when you're doing inbound search, as in I want to query against my inbound search service indexes, I need to configure, first of all, a reverse proxy that allows me to expose my SharePoint farm, or at least one of the sites in that farm. Somewhere I need to get to the web service call, make a web service call to my farm. I need to expose that through a reverse proxy. I need to encrypt that connection with a certificate so that it's not unsecured. And that certificate has to be a certain type, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And then you can basically, using the MSOL tools, we configure my SharePoint farm to say, I trust a connection encrypted with this certificate from this Office 365 tenant, and I'm not going to entrust anything else. So you're configuring the server-to-server trust, if you like. And when you're going the other way, you do it the opposite way around. You configure Office 365, your tenancy in 365, to accept an incoming connection from your on-premises server farm. And that's how we secure that. There are some requirements around the reverse proxy, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then under the hood, with the the Active Directory synchronization and the Azure Directory services, is really just how we ensure that the identity that you have on premises is identical to the identity that you have in the cloud. And again, I'll hopefully show you a little bit of that. In terms of the configuration pieces, the tasks are fairly straightforward, albeit there's PowerShell and all kinds of stuff you need to do, but there's some nice scripts on TechNet you can just download and fill in the blanks, and away they go. So first of all, for hybrid to work, we need to replace our token signing certificate. That's the certificate I mentioned that is used to encrypt the connection from online to your farm. So we're basically saying, I trust this certificate. I don't trust the default one, so I know which one I want to trust. Then we use that to configure the trust between SharePoint, on-premises, and ACS. So Active Directory Azure services in terms of trusting the authentication path. We configure the user profile service application. So that's the important bit. If you imagine, if you make a connection from one farm to another, how do we know who you are? We don't take an SP user token context and transfer that across. We can't do that. That doesn't work. We need something that says, here's my user ID, that is something that identifies the user in on-premises, that I can then rehydrate in Office 365 and create that user token over there in order to do security trimming and things, and vice versa. And the only way to make that work is if you've got identically synchronized user profile service applications, or at least synchronized enough so that there's enough unique entries in the profile service application to identify the person. Typically, email address will be fine. Most people, you very rarely come across two people with the same email address. That's a very unusual thing to happen. And then we create the result sources in the query rule, which I'll show you in a demo. The final thing, or the final couple of things, is the concept of having the secure store. And the secure store you only need if you're doing inbound. So if I'm doing searches from 365 to on-premises, in the secure store service in Office 365, I secure a certificate that's going to sign and be used to decrypt my identity. So I can basically say, connect to Office 365 result sources, or connect to my on-premises result sources, sorry, using this secure store ID, which contains an encrypted username and password effectively. So it can do my secure streaming. Again, you only need that for the inbound scenario. In terms of the online tools that you need, online services sign-in assistant, not many people actually use that these days. They tend to use ADFS and they get redirected and signed in that way. Active Directory module for Windows PowerShell, these are all downloadable tools. And directory synchronization tool, again, is downloadable. So it gives us these connection pieces here that we've seen on that previous diagram. So it's all free, it's all downloadable. Well, ADFS isn't free. Everything else is free. And it allows you to set this thing up. Like I say, there's some very well in this slide deck. Do you know if you get given the slide decks? No, okay. Well, I'll make sure I show the slide at the end. Or you can just mail me, and I'll give you the resources. But there's a number of technical articles at the end of the slides that talk about where you can get scripts to do all this setup from. The things you need to do then. So configuring Active Directory synchronization. Basically what we're doing here is we're saying, take my on-premises user, their Active Directory information, and replicate that information into the Azure Active Directory services at Microsoft. So trust Microsoft to host your user identities. That happens, configuring that federation and configuring that Active Directory synchronization has a number of steps. So the first thing is we want to do is, I don't want to be able to stand up a tenant in Office 365, point it at your AD and say, yeah, go and replicate that guy's AD. Okay, we don't want that because that's just going to expose all kinds of hacking and spoof attacks. So we have to know you own the domain. So if you've gone through this process of federation with Active Directory, you tell us what the domain is you want to replicate. We then expect you to be able to have the authority to make some DNS changes to that domain, add some new records, and when those records appear, we trust you then that you have authority over that domain, and therefore we'll replicate it. It's a very simple process. We say it takes about 48 hours. It typically takes about 20 minutes, depending on your DNS provider. So then you download and install the DirSync tool, put it on a member server. Oh, that's weird. You put it on a member server on premises. You shouldn't install it on a domain controller. It's a very simple tool. It runs off the command line. And then you run a wizard. So the wizard is just pops up and says, what domain do you want to synchronize? What's the connection? Where's the Office 365 interface? Where's the Office 365 tenant URL? Which Active Directory services do you want to federate from on premises? Give me a username and password so I can get into Active Directory and actually do that federation. And it's very, very seamless and almost impossible to get that wrong. And then from the Office 365 dashboard, if you log into your tenant, you'll start to see the users appearing as you synchronize them into the tenant. That should have built differently. So all your users will come across, your groups will come across, and of course you can specify the OU that comes across. So you're not going to replicate all of the service accounts within your domain, for example. You just bring across the users you want. And then the final step is obviously to activate those users and grant them licenses. So if most of you have probably gone through that process of logging into your Office 365 administration portal, select the user and activate them and give them a license to perform some function in Office 365, whether it's a SharePoint license or a SharePoint and Exchange license, might be turned into an admin, whatever you might want to do. And that's one of the links. That link's also at the end of the slide deck as well. And then coming to the other side of things, so the single sign-on experience, we're going to configure single sign-on, change the token signing certificate, and then establish the trusts. We do all that through a series of PowerShell commands, which get a little bit complicated. So when we're doing ADFS, have anyone deployed ADFS in the room? Any IT pros? So you're familiar with that process. So basically you install the service, you then put the latest hotfix on it, and then you configure the various things. So you have, typically you could go direct ADFS to Office 365, or you can deploy an ADFS proxy that you'd sit inside of DMZ because you're making that connection out to the internet. You wouldn't necessarily expose the ADFS server directly. Then you SSL protect the endpoint, and then you make sure the endpoint's accessible. So endpoint accessibility, typically you make the proxy the endpoint accessible for connectivity. It's hard, it's pretty, I can't demo it, but it's a little bit, it's not difficult to do. If you follow the steps, it's fairly straightforward actually configuring this with domain federation with single sign-on with Office 365. And what happens is, if I can show you, I'll walk through this and I'll show you, if you've not seen it, I'll show you the experience on one of my tenants, in a Microsoft tenant. The way you configure the whole thing, you deploy the PowerShell, so you download the PowerShell tools from Microsoft.com or Office365.com, whatever they are. You install them, you run this Connect MSOL service. So we're now into custom PowerShell that's provided with this toolkit. And that basically authenticates to Office 365. So you provide Connect MSOL service, you provide credentials, and that will connect you to Office 365 as an authenticated user. You then set the ADFS context. So I'm basically saying, under what context do I want to have ADFS single sign-on, and then run the convert domain. So the domains by default in Office 365 are not federated domains. They have their own set of, you can have your own set of unique onmicrosoft.com passwords and create them all there as cloud-based users. If you convert it to a federated domain, you can then start to bring in your own on-premises your Active Directory users into the cloud service. So you're basically converting the domain from one type to another. The token signing certificate is fairly straightforward. Again, we recommend that you use a public certificate authority to do this. However, you could use a self-signed certificate. Now the question is, which one's more secure? Anyone know? So strictly speaking, it's this guy, because this has been created off a machine in your environment that you manage, whereas this is coming from a public authority. Truth is, SSL certs, very highly encryption algorithms are generally very secure. I'm not aware of anyone that's broken one yet, although I wouldn't trust those Russians, but you never know. They're all up to things. Everyone's up to things and trying to break encryption. So which one would you use? It's up to you, really. You could use either. The one you can't use, domain issued certificates. If you issue a domain from your own AD certificate services inside your Active Directory, you cannot use that one. The key is we can't trust it, right? We don't know where, in terms of the chain of trust, we don't know where it's come from. And then you basically import the signing certificate. So what you're saying is, my federated connection is going to be encrypted using this token signing certificate. And I trust it to work with my tenant. You then establish the trust. So again, this is just, it looks nice when you do this in PowerShell, but on slides it's a bit boring, I'm afraid. But basically we're just configuring the connection. So we create an app principal, an application principal inside Office 365. We specify the proxy. So we're basically saying, we're going to, as your Active Directory Services is our new Directory Services capability for Office 365. It used to be called MSODS. We're basically saying this is the connection to the ACS service. So when I'm doing my federation, this is the endpoint I want to connect to. And then you complete the trust. So you specify the security token issuer, you specify the endpoints and the certificate you're going to use, and it sounds quite boring. It's actually really straightforward, and it's very scriptable. The only other thing you need, if you're doing the inbound trust, is the secure store. So for the secure store application, we need something that can configure that encryption channel to or configure a secure channel with the reverse proxy. So where I'm actually establishing my connection. So I have, if you've ever done secure store work, you have the concept of a target application ID. So I specify that in my Office 365 tenant. I specify the authentication type of certificate. And this is, I'll just build this out actually before I go across. So you specify the authentication type of certificate, the certificates for the secure store. You should not use self-signed certs in this case. Okay, they won't work because you're establishing the trust now out on the internet, and if you use a self-signed cert, there's no certificate chain of authority that can be reached and trusted. Okay, so we have to use a public signed certificate in this case so that the proxy and SharePoint on Office 365 know that they can trust that certificate by verifying it against VeriSign or GoDaddy or whoever the certificate provider thought, or Ensign or something. Again, it's all listed in the resources at the end. Come on. Configuring the UPA, fairly straightforward. You must have a user profile application up and running. You must have it running on premises. It's automatically running in the cloud. It must be populated with the current data. So if you change people's information, make sure you've done a new user profile import. So you want to get the same information in both places. And you've run the federation as well, the Directory Services Federation. And again, make sure that it's done in both sites. So the user profile service application in Office 365 will automatically be updated with everything that you synchronize across using the MSO data, the Active Directory synchronization tool. That will come across to the Azure Active Directory services and get synchronized there. Make sure you've done the same thing. If your UPA goes stale on premises, these hybrid scenarios will start to break. Okay. And it's the UPA that decides, well, especially when we're doing inbound, that when we rehydrate the user, we know who they are, we know what groups they belong to, we know what we know what claims they have. So we know that when we create the user token for security trimming, we can then trim the search results that come back, or the BCS data that comes back, or whatever it may be, with the appropriate credentials so that user doesn't see things they shouldn't see. Exactly the same as you do search on premises today. Typically, we'd use any of those as the attribute. Best thing is to populate as many as possible. The only one you actually need to make this work, the minimum requirement, will be email. So we don't care about the SID, really, because it is theoretically a different user. If you create a user token from them, they are different. They just have this, if it makes sense, it's two different people with the same identity. If that makes sense. Probably not. But we typically use the email address to determine who they are. So we can do the security trimming based on the fact that we've created a trusted connection between our farms, and we control the information in that user token. Therefore, we know we trust that user because they've been encrypted with something that we've supplied. When it comes to the reverse proxy side of things, effectively the reverse proxy is simply a gateway. So yes, we establish an outbound secure connection to the reverse proxy. We store the certificate on the reverse proxy, so we can do that encrypted channel. And the reverse proxy also has to be capable of a number of things, one of which is supporting an RFC, which is RFC 2716, which is basically to do with the encrypted transport of user identities. And it needs to be able to pass that. And right now, the only supported gateway for the reverse proxy is Microsoft TMG, which if any of you know Microsoft TMG, you'll know it's a retired product that you can't buy licenses for anymore and can't use anymore. Okay, so this is a problem. You cannot use the TMG component of UAG either. That will not work, okay? We are doing an awful lot of work here with F5, with Cisco, with Juniper, with Bluecoat to test and establish capabilities with those. We have the MSIT reverse proxy is using F5, so we know it works. We just have to complete the full test suite before we can use it. I've recently done a deployment in the Netherlands with a customer who has got this to work fine with Cisco NetScaler, sorry. So we know that works. But we haven't gone through the full testing suite to officially give it the rubber stamp. But we know it works. Anyway, it's the most challenging piece, really, the reverse proxy. So these are the requirements it must support. Fairly straightforward. Certificate auth against using wildcard or sans-cert. So these are the kind of things it must do, and this is the key one here, this RFC 2716. There's an awful lot of proxy servers out there that don't support that requirement, and it just falls down at that point. If it falls down at that point, you can't do the rest of it either, because it won't transfer the right information. You can't do the user identity. At that point, I had one customer who said, well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to stick my SharePoint farm on the internet. So I don't need a reverse proxy anymore, and I'm just doing S2S trust instead, which is fine if that's what they want to do, but we wouldn't advocate that approach, not really. But again, the other thing you need to do is make sure that you can do path mapping and link translation. So make sure that that proxy has all the capabilities. If you're doing different URLs externally from internally, make sure it can handle that link mapping capabilities as well. In terms of configuration, high level, fairly straightforward. I won't go too much into this. Are we running out of time? Damn. Okay, you're going to get all this. I'm really sorry about that. So let me show you very, very quickly this last bit. So this is I'm going to walk through and show it you. Is basically saying how we connect the two farms together. So I'm going to show you that instead, rather than talk about it, if that's all right. And then we're done. So I do apologise. Let me just... And there was me worried I was going to take too long on this. Take not enough time on this session. Okay, two farms. Make sure I connect to that one. I have documents in this farm.
Showing it again?
No, clearly not. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, come on. There we go. Come on. Yeah, there we go. Right, showing you. Connect. So I've got two servers. I'm praying that's going to connect. I have content in both. So all I've done is I've got two farms, two document libraries, different documents in each. And what I want to show is how from one farm I can connect to the other. So that farm's not connecting for some reason, but the main stuff I want to show you is in here. STK2 is the farm that has been configured to support incoming search queries. So I'm saying this farm supports queries from farm 1. And if I do a search here, it probably needs jitting, but you can see what I get is a block at the top, which is results from SharePoint from secondary farm, which is SK2, and you can see the URL, SPHVM3355. If I scroll down, you'll see, so the resolution's not great, you'll see a set of results, and it's telling me I'm a liar, as these things I want to do. All right. Okay, time-wise, I thought this was going to work, but it's clearly not. There's the result block at the top and the result block at the bottom should be two different URLs. You should be able to see two sets. I promise you it does work. It clearly isn't working for me right now. In order to configure this, though, the way we do it is we create what we call a result source and a query rule. So once that we've established all our connectivity, we go down here, we set up a result source. I think I know what I've done. I think I've pointed my remote result source at the local farm. So I do new result source, which is remote SharePoint. And no, I'm not. I specify the root web application of the farm I want to bring results from. And that's all I need to do. Once I've configured those trusts, that's all I need to do. Because this is outbound, I can use default auth, which means it'll use my identity when I connect out. It'll do that in token encryption and use my identity. If I was using inbound, I'd have to do an SSO ID, so the secure store with a certificate, and I'd specify that instead. In which case I'd specify the SSO ID, and I'd specify the ID of the secure store application that I'd done. If I cancel that and just go back to the cancel.
The BA inside thing, so you still need to do this, it's just a different
Yes,
part.
so if you go down the route of wanting to weave results, it's a different web part, so it just looks different. You basically remove the default results web part and change it for the BA Insight one. And then you specify in there where your result sources are.
Any quirks to that one, or is it just
No, not really. It's
the
other than you can't guarantee the ranking is perfect. Other than that, it's fine, and it works for SharePoint 2010 as well.
that's just defining the sort of science.
Yeah. And then the last thing, and again, apologies for the overrun. I have my query rule, which basically says, for the result source I've established, which is my secondary farm, I have a query rule which simply says when I query using, so I've got no conditions, which means it'll fire every time. If you've played around with search in 2013, there's all kinds of things I can do here with like subject words and action words, and I can say force it to only query the remote farm when I put a certain keyword in, or don't never query it, or only query it under certain conditions. And in this particular instance, I added a result block to show above the source. Oh, sorry. So block ranked with core results. Oh, that's why. That's what I wanted, always shown above, so that's maybe why it broke. So basically I'm saying, when I query against my secondary farm, I'm using all the default settings here. I want to use the original query source, so that's fine. I'm just wherever I query from, and create me a result block that floats above my main set of search results with the results from that remote location.
What did the one that you had selected do?
This one block is ranked within the core results, so effectively what it will do is it will try and make a judgment as to where that result block should appear in the wider set of results. So if I bring back 500 results and I have a block of 5, it could be in any one of 100 pages, if you like. It could appear at the bottom, it could appear in the middle, it could appear somewhere else. So typically if you're doing cross-farm federation or hybrid, because you want to see these things, you're doing it for a reason, you can just say, stick it right at the top. So I get that bracketed experience, and I can see it all up there. And other things I can do around, what display template should I use? So do I want these results to look completely different? Use a different HTML template for those results as well, and change the experience difference. There is some limitations when you're doing search refinement. So you get the left-hand panel with the choose author, choose document type. That doesn't work for federation. So any results that come across from a remote source don't influence that refinement panel. Okay. And I think we're just about done with that. So this is what it should have looked like.
That's true as well for the third-party web parts.
Yes.
They
They will go away, unless you write your own custom refiner. Come on. All right. Okay, you got the screen view and I haven't. Let me try again. We're done now. This is literally the last slide. Go, 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 go. There we go. Okay, this is what it should look like. This is one I prepared earlier, as I say. So inbound search, this is result from SharePoint on-prem, with results in Office 365 down the bottom, and then the other way around, results from the cloud, results from on-premises at the bottom. So that's what that demo should look like. And at 11 p.m. last night, that's what it did look like. But I don't know what's going on. So it can be a nice experience. You can customize it, you can change it. You don't have to use result blocks. You could have it, the verticals across the top, you could have it so that I had a vertical up here that you could click and it would say go to Office 365. And you pull up a complete set of results from there, or the other way around. So that's all possible. So with that, I was going to do a recap, so I'll skip the recap. The demo I just kind of fudged. Those are the slides. Make sure they stay up there on the camera. And you can email me and I'll give them to you if you want. Other than that, I'm sorry I overrun, but it's question and answer time. It's a big subject. Any questions? One question.
Can you do a hybrid with on-premise 2010 version to
Good question. So the question was, can I do on-premise if I have SharePoint 2010 on-premises? Can I do hybrid if I have SharePoint 2010 on-premises? If out of the box, no. The reason being, all of that trust configuration only works with SharePoint 2013. If, however, you use the BA Insight connector, they produce a man-in-the-middle type connector that will do hybrid scenarios between SharePoint 2010 on-premises and Office 365 in the cloud. They'll do the search weaving, they'll do everything. So if the goal is complete migration, is it worth doing hybrid? Yes. How long is it going to take you to migrate? Some customers might take a year, some might take 3 years, but they want to do it slowly. If I want to start shutting down my on-premises server farms, moving them to the cloud, for that hybrid configuration, I don't want my people going, I'll just search in my old on-premises farm to find stuff. It's not there. I'll go to Office 365 to find stuff. Oh, there it is. I want to be able to go to one place and find everything I need. So from that scenario, considering if you're already doing ADFS, then you've got the single sign-on setup. For hybrid search outbound, you don't even need ADFS. You can do it all with Active Directory synchronization tooling, which is free. Public sign certificate, a few £100, a few thousand krona, right? So it's not an expensive thing to do. Running the PowerShell, it's really straightforward. The investment to configure the search center, any SharePoint admin can do that except me, clearly. But it's not a difficult thing to do, and that search hybrid is very easy. And it means you're not having to index everything. You know, we're hoping to have some investments in that in the future around various things we can do with indexing, but right now, hybrid is the best thing we have. And the search is where most of the investment is for that trust.
But what about if you are installing something on 2013 on premises, like you do for SharePoint, to get the hybrid coexistence?
So that's perfectly fine as well. So you could install. Question was, what if you install SharePoint 2013 on premises for hybrid coexistence? Then that's absolutely fine. And in that regard, you can do it exactly out the box.
Yeah.
There's even one customer I have who are doing something really kind of freaky, where they've got Office 365 in the cloud. They have a SharePoint 2013 farm on premises, just a handful of servers, running a search service application.
Yes.
They have a federation between the two, so the search service application on premises has a remote index configured against Office 365 as its primary source of search information. And then they have a number of 2010 farms on premises as well that are consuming that search service application. So it's kind of it's like a service application consumption plus federation, plus hybrid federation as well. Works fine.
You talked about the idea to have it for single sign-on, or what you would like to call it.
Same sign-on.
Yeah. In the future, when the customer can choose to get the ADF services in Office 365, so in that case, you can remove the ADF sometimes with the password stick, enabling, of course, the user.
So you say the customer is putting their ADFS where?
In the service in Office 365.
Oh, so using the Azure?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could do that, yeah. Yeah, you can move ADFS. As long as it's going to support the requirement, which is, from ADFS perspective, is the same sign-on experience, then you're fine. For the hybrid scenarios, you don't need it. Okay? Thank you. Sorry, overran. Get some lunch.